Moving the needle on founder failure, one conversation at a time. I'm your host, Lucas Poles, and welcome to Startup 2.0 by Spark XYZ. Join us each week as we give you access to some of the top investors and entrepreneurs around the country to help you think through and overcome some of the top challenges that startups face.
I think there's no better place in the country to be investing than Los Angeles.
What is the problem that you're solving and for who? Like, what is that specific pain point?
Sometimes when a company is not listening to its customers and just thinks it knows better than its customers, has a really, really hard time finding product market fit.
I want to see somebody that isn't going to stop. You know, this person, you just feel like they're gonna make it work.
Big heartfelt thank you to Brex, who without their support, this show would not be possible. We've seen firsthand the difficulties accessing basic corporate credit without providing a security deposit or personal guarantee early on. As companies grow, managing expenses has become more difficult and time consuming, which is why we've partnered with Brex to offer a corporate credit card that is not personally guaranteed, offers higher credit limits, provides auto reconciliation, and integrates with ERPs using receipt capture. Brex is the credit card of the startup ecosystem, and we highly encourage you to check them out.
Jim, thank you for coming on the show.
Well, thank you, Lucas. I appreciate it anytime.
So typically where we like to start out is want to find out more about Braid Theory, kind of what you guys do, kind of the whole shebang.
I like to say that we're a vertically integrated venture advisory, which I know sounds like big words, but I think that if you break it down, we'll kind of know exactly what we're on about. We're vertically integrated. We have a lot of space. We are going to be opening up some new space soon as we are allowed back in due to COVID-19. We did experiment with a co-working space, but we've kind of divested ourselves of that now, and moving kind of more of a venture studio model in that respect. And then we have a space down at Altasea at the Port of Los Angeles where we have some dockside space and a lot of warehouse space that we can kind of move around in. This would be typically very good for our startups that need that have a more science or engineering bent, that have larger equipment and the use of water. We have events. Lucas, you yourself have been a panelist at Ignite 22, a very large kind of event in kind of a slash food fest, food trucks, and different kinds of panels, street festival kind of a thing, right? It's a nice vibe, good feel.
Yeah.
But we also have 24 other events that we do, including our Ignite 22 pitches, which are part of a themed Ignite 22 pitch competition, culminating at the end of the year, where ultimately we get to see about 36 companies pitch all up. And then we've just finished our quarantine series, so we do a lot of other pitches that are virtual and online, as well as doing work with Startup Grind. And sponsoring some of their pitches and events. We also sponsor events at University of California, San Diego, and UCI for their events around science and engineering kinds of startups. So we are a blue tech focused, or as I like to say, we're science and engineering focused with a blue tech bent. So that kind of heavy industry, science, engineering, and the enabling technologies that allow it to happen. Consequently, we run kind of an advisory. We do some consulting work with companies. We have government contracts that we do, accelerator programs with country of origin startups. They come and do some kind of market access and create a market readiness program for them. We do a lot of that stuff. What else do we do? Raise the fund. That's scary. And soon we'll be deploying that capital. So, fun times.
Yeah, awesome.
Vertically integrated. So that's what I mean by vertically integrated.
No, it's awesome. So a couple things I want to jump through specifically with what we just talked about. So first, let's walk through a little bit about blue tech, because there aren't a lot of people that end up focusing specifically on that. So can you give me some examples of what a company that would fall under blue tech would look like?
Blue tech is really broad, right? Because it encompasses what I would classify as a kind of a cross and multidisciplinary science and kind of tech area. And then on the other side, kind of a multi-sector engagement. So it could be anything from aerospace to agriculture, and it could be all the enabling tech as well. So, you know, software as a service, apps on a phone, apps on a widget on a desktop. It could be a whole bunch of stuff. But ultimately, the goal is to maintain a better downstream advantage for the ocean, rather than pollution, or rather than you know, overfishing, or you know, ships putting a lot more stuff into the, you know, atmosphere, carbon emissions. So our focus is to look at technologies that are what some people might classify as deep tech, and see if they have an ocean application or an upstream application that allows us to prevent some kind of pollution further down the line. We also want to look at technologies that may, and I'm using this term in a positive way, exploit the ocean for some kind of positive gain. For example, there is a compound in most crustacean kind of animals in the ocean called hemocyanin. It's blue blood. Squid have it. It's kind of a composition of ink as well. And horseshoe crabs have it. Limpets have it. All of these creatures have this blue blood. It's the reason why your shrimp looks kind of a purpley colour before you put it on the barbecue. And then it kind of turns, well, I do, I'm Australian, right? So shrimp on the barbie thing, right? It goes pink, pinky orange colour. That's the hemocyanins. And hemocyanins are really, really important chemical in biotechnology. In fact, without hemocyanins, we may not have a viable vaccine for COVID-19, because we use this to test for bacteria that may enter the vaccination process. So it's and other microorganisms. So it's a really important step in how we validate a good drug that's entering the market. These are the kinds of things that I mean by exploitation. I don't mean it in a negative way. I mean it in a positive way, so that we can create a much more sustainable future for the ocean.
Nice, super exciting.
Now this can include shipping, or it can include biotech. It can include logistics and supply chain, water quality. All of those things apply.
Awesome, cool. Honestly, very interesting and diverse field that you guys end up looking at.
It's fun.
Yeah, much different technology than some of the B2B SaaS stuff that I'm looking at.
There you go. But I like some of the B2B SaaS stuff. We need that too, right?
Yeah.
We need that to improve or optimize supply chains, or whatever it might be.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. Cool. So you said that you were raising a fund. So what? Let's walk through a little bit about that. So when that does happen, what are you looking to deploy? Like, are you you have a check size, target, like area of
the standard kinds of questions, right? every startup wants to know how much money. What do you focus on? Okay, so our focus is going to be on blue tech, obviously, for the fund. We will be looking at check sizes from between $100,000 to about $400,000. We want to keep it under $1 million. We won't lead every round, but we definitely want to try and syndicate as many as we can. We have trusted investors that we know have domain experience or can bring something to the table for a blue tech company. So we like to go to them first. So we broaden the scope and potential success for that startup. We don't want to create barriers for the startups, obviously. We want to create a smooth pathway, a smooth transition to commercialization, where sometimes there has been barriers and difficulties. Part of that is we have this advisory side that does a lot of consulting. Part of that is to look for undiluted funds for startups that can kind of kick the fundraising even down the road a little bit. So if they're doing a rolling round, or if they're doing, some other kind of financial instrument that maybe requires them to ramp up an additional area of their prototype. Maybe they don't have a bridge round. Maybe they need to do a couple more pilot projects to get some data around a project. Then I think that's a significant area that we can assist a startup. Certainly with grant money, that's always important. But also we've got space, and soon we will have some prototyping that we can do, electronics prototyping as well. We'll have the venture studio, so there'll be some additional kind of office space. There'll be the space down at Altasea again. We're moving back into Altasea. We were there and we had to move out because of some construction. So we see that as kind of multipliers for the startups, particularly in the ocean space, and we like having this vertical integration. I think is important for startups to move along their commercialization phase.
Yeah, no, 100% agree. So you brought up something that's I always find interesting. So my due diligence for a much simpler company is significantly easier, right? So I can call a customer. I can look at bank statements. It's a little bit different. But when you're dealing with deep tech and biotech, like how are you leveraging like advisors? Like are you doing all the due diligence specifically yourself? I feel like there are, when you get into very niche specific areas, it can be difficult to validate maybe the potential of technology. And so walk me through that a little bit.
I'm a little bit selfish, right? So I kind of know what I know what I like to know, and I know what I want. The problem is, as my co-founder Anne says to me all the time, she says, we've got to try and find a way of getting all the stuff out of your head and on paper, or create a program, or tell it to someone else, educate other people. I go, no, I know what I want, right? So you're asking me to do something here which normally is inside my head, and there's the gears are going around, right? Okay, you're right. I do look at things a whole lot differently. I have kind of my first three steps are, I want to look to maintain that they've got a good defensible IP. Mm-hmm. I want good technology that's well validated. I want some data around that, because one of the biggest things that we see in the science and engineering areas, when it goes to, it might work in the lab, works great in the lab, and then industry says we're really interested because you claim, your value proposition says you claim 30% increase in or a decrease in this or an increase in that, and we want to make sure that we actually hit those targets. So what works in the lab sometimes doesn't work out in the environment. So we want to make sure that people have validated those ideas. So that's the first thing. Second thing is, while others are looking at kind of team and the story, we see teams, specialist scientific teams, have a domain experience all of their own. So I would much prefer them go to a course or move to a different role within the company than allow that expertise to disappear. And so it's not as easy as just, saying, well, let's look at the team and let's look how you execute. There are a lot of moving parts when it comes to the science and engineering fields and moving into industry. So while we're not looking at that, we really, really do want to make sure that you've got a very good business case. So we want to see a good go-to-market strategy. And when I mean a good go-to-market strategy, I want to see what it looks like. That market latency is really, really important for startups in our area, because these technologies don't always create demand immediately. These have demand phases that are kind of future demand. So that latency period is really, really important for us to see how we can compress that kind of nascent, where they're still in the lab, all the way to that demand phase. And so the more we can compress that timeline, that latency timeline, the better it is. So that's really important for us. And then finally, product market fit. You know, I want you to go out there and I want you to interview as many industry people as possible, and I want you to get feedback, and I want you to put it in a chart, and I want you to tell me what it looks like. So those are the three key areas, Lucas, that we really, really focus on. And I think that unlike most other tech areas, I think that these are the kind of the vital signs, if you like. You know, this is the kind of the heartbeat, brain activity, and the pulse kind of. Well, that is kind of heartbeat. And the breathing of the startups that we see, right?
Awesome, super interesting. So because you end up dealing with a lot of blue tech, biotech, the area that are very science focused. Yeah. Do you end up running into more homogeneous teams where it's like all scientists that maybe don't know how to put together a go-to-market strategy and don't know that side of it?
So, you know, I've had to put in a bit of work on this, and while most investors will probably take a pass on those kinds of companies, or they might you know, wait around for them to mature, we actually like to do a little bit of hand holding. You know, I've got some companies that I'm really interested in that I help coach to get them to a phase where they're ready for that kind of critical go-to-market strategy and commercialization pathway. So I'm not afraid to kind of put in some kind of free time in order to get them prepared for what comes next. That I think that's critical. The second part of this is to create kind of the hopper, right? I guess you could call it deal flow, or you could call it kind of a long-term pipeline. I could like to call it a hopper because I like that funnel shape, right? There's more in the top than there is that comes out of the bottom. And kind of shake it around a bit and see what we've got. See what kind of assistance they need, and see if they need a second chance. You know, if their teams of too many scientists and, you know, not enough people who've got some business acumen, I'd much rather them either go off and do some courses, or we can reshuffle the teams, or we can add to the teams. You know, we base most of our stuff on evidence-based entrepreneurship. I mean, we are adherents of evidence-based entrepreneurship. So startups that come to us should have really good evidence to support where they are anyway. And that includes what their business model looks like, how many customers they have, you know, through the customer interviews, they should have a really good understanding of what the customer needs are and the customer expectations. And then they should really understand what that market looks like and how it's changing over time. They should have a good competitive analysis. They should have a really good revenue model. So all these things matter. You know, there's actually a really good article today that came out in Nature magazine. I know that's not common on everyone's lists, but I did post it to my Facebook account. And it's the Francis Crick Institute. One of their EIRs wrote a really good article on kind of what's needed for science and engineering startups, and what's missing. What are the gaps? And the gaps are exactly the three areas that I just said that we focus on for our fund, right? Which is the go-to-market strategy, and product market fit, and defensible IP. So, if you don't have those, if you don't have a good scaffold from which to hang, it's not going to work.
Yeah, no, super, yeah, very true.
It's actually really interesting. So I was at a meeting once at Sloan, MIT Sloan, and I do work at Cal State Fullerton's incubator, and I help out there. I'm one of the ambassadors. I'm quite proud of that. I'm a Cal State graduate myself, so I like the system, and I like to give back when I can. And so I was at a meeting at Sloan, and Sloan turned around to me and said, "So Jim, you've had all this experience with iCore, and you help out all these student teams and everything, particularly the science and engineering teams. How do you get these science and engineering teams to come across to the business school?" And I looked at them and I said, "Hang on a minute, guys. You guys are MIT. You guys are supposed to be the smartest guys in the room. If you guys don't know, how are we expected to get it right?" And honestly, this is actually a problem, right? Because there's sometimes these two departments don't agree, and they don't always see eye to eye on things that are that they should have common ground on, you know. And so it's been a difficulty. It's going to remain a difficulty. I don't see any real way past it except to continue having people from the business side, people who have had experience exiting companies. And it really, honestly, it doesn't matter what kind of company that has, experience in even if they've got a current company. It's really important to go and, cross the line, go and talk to some science and engineers who've got some startups. Maybe they might learn something. So that's still critically important. I cannot stress enough how important that is.
100% agree, but you're right. It's not gonna. It has to do with fundraising in universities. It's why all the disciplines are siloed, is because they want their specific win, and so trying to cross together is a whole nightmare.
I wish more universities concentrated on more multidisciplinary activities.
Yeah,
and then I think that at least one entrepreneurial class should be relatively compulsory, right? If and I say relatively compulsory, at least you should take a basic economics class.
Yeah.
Microeconomics probably better for business, but I think anyone who's thinking about an entrepreneurial pathway should definitely think of, if they're in the sciences, definitely think of doing economics 101B or whatever it is for microeconomics, or an entrepreneurship class. Yeah.
No, 100%. So we talked about maybe some of the red flags that are there. Like, what's a company that gets you super excited? Is it just they have all the boxes ticked? Like, what is it? What is that next wow, oh my god, what is this?
So I got my wish lists, right? I've got companies that I really have a wish list, and so I do a lot of pounding the pavement. I kind of knock on university professors' doors and I ask them what they're doing. Sometimes I get the door shut in my face, but sometimes, most of the time, most people want to talk about what they're doing, what they're working on.
Yeah.
So, I always ask them, well, so where do you see yourself in 5-10 years? Or, which direction is your research going? Or what's going to be important in the next 5 years in this field?
Mm-hmm.
And they tell me. And so I write it down, diligently write it down, and I go, cool, this is awesome. All right, got it. Excellent. I'll make a mental note of how that's going to fit in with all the other companies. And so the things that are really jazzing me right now, because I can't say that there's a clear kind of standout on a business side. But I mean, if there was a company that stood out on a business side, as long as they had those three things and they could really articulate product market fit, business model, go-to-market strategy, and a defensible IP, I would be super excited. But if they were in areas like solid state batteries, high density solid state batteries, that would really jazz me out for a number of reasons. Because we can shrink the size of the battery down to the size of a credit card, And that would be enormous for things like satellites, carrying payloads, putting payloads underwater. That would be terrific for drones and small vehicles. It would be absolutely tremendous, although sometimes I might get looked at the funny way if I say this, but for the defense industry, definitely. I asked head of innovation for Lockheed Martin what she saw as being most important things in the next 5 years. And she said, if you can bring me companies that are miniaturizing energy storage. Great, check that box, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, those are the kinds of things that jazz me out. On the other hand, I want to travel to Mars. And if I want to, and maybe I won't ever get there, but because I really want to, those are the kinds of things that you're going to have to overcome a whole lot of problems in order to get there. So I want to know, I want to know cool things that startups are doing for that space that can be applied to the Earth. Yeah. And, applied to healthcare or feeding lots and lots of people, upwards of, 8 billion people, 9 billion, and curing people, providing energy for people here on Earth. So I want to see how those things can be used here on Earth as well. And I think that we need those kinds of moonshot or Manhattan Project or Apollo Project kind of activity, because sparks creativity, it sparks discovery, imagination. Those are the things that I think are important. I think if someone came into my office and had more imagination about where they think that their product could go, I'd probably be more jazzed about that.
Awesome. Yeah, super exciting. Cool. So let's kind of jump back to kind of now. So we've been in COVID for 4 months now?
Close on, end of March to now, yeah.
So I feel like a lot of the initial kind of shock has worn off, but like what are you advising startups right now who kind of for the next year? What are the questions that maybe they're coming to you with? What are you talking to them about? Like what's kind of the overall game plan?
Sometimes the market is always going to be a moving target, even good times. It's going to be a moving target. So always re-interview customers. If you need to pivot now, so that we'll create a pivot program. Allows you to move towards a pivot target. If that's too difficult, if you've got the runway, you can suspend operations, I guess, for a little while and kind of hit a reset button when everyone goes back. Yeah. I have heard of some startup companies that have done that. Some have retooled and done some stuff for COVID-19. It's horses for courses, right? I see it varied. What I don't want companies to do is probably the easiest way of explaining this. I don't want companies to stagnate, and I don't want them to atrophy in any way. I want them to maintain the momentum. So that means continuing to pitch, continuing to call people up, cold call investors, and ask, hey, I got really cool. Can we talk? Can we organize a Zoom meeting? This is the time to do it. Customers are going to be, a lot of the industrial customers that we've got are still, then a lot of them are not essential. So they're still going to be at home. Call them up. You can do a whole lot more and different customer discovery now than you could before. Yeah. You can ask them, okay, so how's their strategy, the customer, you can ask the customer, how's the strategy now compared to the strategy as it was before? So that we can learn from the behaviours of changing what our focus is. So I think there's plenty of things you can do. There's no excuse not to. Look, I don't come from the school of failure is okay. Especially if you've got investment money and it's someone else's money. Just be mindful of that and there's no reason to fail. There are plenty of people to go to and talk to about, look, how can I turn my business around?
Yeah.
Literally thousands. I mean, just even here in the LA ecosystem, we've got a ton of people you can talk to. So really, just reach out to advisors. Reach out and say, look, you know, and don't. Obviously, we can't do. Can I have a cup of coffee with you and pick your brain? You know, don't do that, because we can't really have coffee. But you know, I don't mind spending, you know, half an hour to an hour on the phone with someone exploring a new area of the market. I mean, you know, I might be a biologist, but on the other side, I'm also an economist to study economics. So I can talk about that. I can talk about business models. I'm happy to sit down with someone over a Zoom meeting and have a chat. So I'm available. If you need a second set of eyes over a slide deck, geez, email them to me. You know, I'll take a look. I might have to ask a couple of questions if I don't understand something, but sure, I'll take a look. I just don't think there's any reason to fail. Look, I mean, we've seen big stories of in the past of companies that have made big pivots. I mean, one of the biggest pivots that it's not recent memory, obviously, but you know, Kaiser Steel was a steel manufacturing company. They moved to healthcare, and they're called Kaiser Permanente now.
Yeah.
You know, these are. It doesn't mean that, you know, you'll lose that kind of product integrity or business integrity that you had before in a previous iteration. If you feel as though that business needs to pivot somewhere else, do it.
Nice. Very good advice, honestly. And being generous with your time is also very kind. A lot of people, I don't think entrepreneurs realize that we have more time now because I don't have to drive too.
You don't have to drive. Jeez, yeah, I know, right?
I'm not
so handy.
I'm not sure what's going to happen when we go back, because now I just Zoom meetings all day. But then when we go back to like, oh no, I'm actually in the car driving to a new place. I can't take like 15 meetings a day.
That's right. That's right. I might actually only want to drive to work on only the you know, the days that have like a T in them.
Yeah.
You know, rather than spending, you know, every day at work, which has been, I've done that, and you know, there's only so much driving you can do in Los Angeles. I think since COVID, I've realised how much what limits that are. You know, so I'm and how much stress it places on the body.
Yeah.
So, you know, yeah, definitely. I don't know. I'm the advantage, I think, of all this time, you know, for me, it's nearly 4 hours of traveling that I do in LA on a typical day. You know, not just going to work, but then also going to a couple of meetings.
Yeah.
I can probably look over about half a dozen slide decks in that time.
Yeah.
So if that's a half a dozen over one day, over 5 days, that's, you know, 30 slide decks in a week. That's pretty good.
Yeah.
So, you know, everyone out there, if you want me to look at 30 slide decks in a week, I'm your guy, right? Putting myself out there.
Oh, well, so then perfect. So I guess the best way to end it is, how do people reach you?
You know, I'm not great at emails. It'll take me 2 days to get back to you via email. Lucas, you know that, right? but that doesn't mean to say that you can't send me a slide deck and it will go into a box. I've already got a box that has attachments. So as long as you send me a PDF or a PowerPoint, we're good. If you send me a link, not so much, it'll get buried. But if you send me an attachment, it'll sit right in that box, and I'll go to it. If it's got a number next to it and tells me how many I'm still to read, you know, unread messages in this box is this, then I'll get it and I'll read it and I'll respond to you straight away. I promise. Pinky promise. Semi-pinky promise.
So what's you willing to give up?
So my email address, yes, sorry. Jim@braidtheory.com. And you can find me on social media. I'm either the ampersand spy 4 or I'm Big Jimbo. You know, that's my 2 handles. Usually I think on LinkedIn. Find me on LinkedIn. You can find me on definitely on Facebook. Definitely on Facebook. And I'm the handsome Jim Cooper. So when you're looking up there, that's who you should find. And then and look for all the snarky comments, right? And then you know, follow me on Twitter. I'm not really hugely active on Twitter as much as I am on LinkedIn and Facebook. So yeah.
Cool. Awesome. Well,
Send me that email. Send me those. I can't wait for slide decks.
Oh, they will send you those decks.
Good. I'm looking forward.
Oh, awesome. Well, appreciate you taking the time.
Thanks, Lucas. I appreciate all the work that you do for staffs too.
No, far too kind. But yeah, looking forward to it. Thanks again.
Cheers, mate.